Why most people will never retire comfortably. Most people assume retirement is something that naturally happens at the end of a working life. You work for long enough, you slow down, and eventually you stop. There's an underlying belief that if you follow the rules, retirement will take care of itself. For a long time, that belief made sense. But the system that supported it has changed, and most people haven't noticed. The idea of retirement was built around a very specific set of conditions: stable jobs, rising wages, shorter lifespans, and institutions that carried most of the responsibility. That world no longer exists in the same way. Today, retirement looks familiar on the surface, but the mechanics underneath are very different. In the past, many workers relied on final salary pensions. These were simple in concept. You worked for a company for decades, and when you retired, the company paid you a guaranteed income based on your salary. The risk sat with the employer. The outcome was predictable for the worker. Over time, this model became expensive and difficult to sustain. People lived longer. Markets became more volatile. Companies didn't want long-term pension obligations on their balance sheets, so the risk slowly shifted. Instead of guaranteed income, most people now rely on defined contribution pensions. These don't promise an outcome, they promise a process. Money goes in during your working life. It's invested in markets. And whatever is there at the end is what you have to work with. This changes retirement from something stable into something uncertain. The responsibility quietly moves from institutions to individuals. But the system rarely explains that shift clearly. Another issue is time. Retirement planning depends heavily on starting early, not because of discipline or intelligence, but because of maths. Compound growth needs time to work. Missing the early years makes the later years much harder. When contributions start late, the numbers don't just fall behind, they fall apart. This is one reason many people feel anxious about retirement, even when they're contributing regularly. They sense that the numbers don't quite add up, but they're not sure why. Contribution levels are another problem. Auto-enrollment schemes are often presented as a solution, but they are designed to be politically acceptable, not sufficient. The percentages are usually low enough to avoid pushback, low enough to feel painless, but low contributions over long periods still lead to limited outcomes. On paper, it looks responsible. In reality, it often isn't enough to support decades without full-time income. Inflation makes this worse. A pension pot can look large when viewed as a number, but retirement doesn't happen today. It happens years or decades later. That money has to function in a future where prices are higher and purchasing power is lower. A sum that feels reassuring now may feel modest when it's actually needed. Longevity adds another layer. People are living longer, which is generally positive. But longer lives mean longer retirements. The system wasn't designed for people to spend 25 or 30 years without regular income. This creates a difficult balancing act. Spend too much early in retirement and you risk running out later. Spend too little and you live cautiously through years that were meant to be comfortable. The fear of misjudging this often leads to stress rather than security. There's also a psychological element that rarely gets discussed. Retirement planning is abstract for most of life. It's distant. It doesn't feel urgent. People are more likely to prioritize immediate needs over future ones, especially when the future feels uncertain or confusing. The system relies on individuals making long-term decisions without clear feedback. You don't know if you're doing enough until it's too late to adjust. This uncertainty creates a quiet problem. Many people assume they are behind but don't know by how much. Others assume they're fine but haven't tested that assumption. And because retirement is rarely discussed honestly, people compare themselves to others who are just as unsure. Another reason the system persists is that the consequences are delayed. If retirement fails, it doesn't fail suddenly. It fails gradually. People work longer than planned. They scale back expectations. They rely more on state support or family.
Outside, this looks like
They adjust
flexibility.
collapse. From the inside, it often feels like disappointment. This is why the idea of retirement still exists, even as it becomes harder to achieve comfortably. The system hasn't broken in a dramatic way. It is thinned out. For some people, retirement still works well. For others, it becomes a period of compromise rather than rest. Understanding this isn't about pessimism. It's about seeing the gap between how retirement is imagined and how it actually functions today. The system no longer guarantees comfort. It offers a framework and shifts the outcome onto individuals. Once that's understood, the confusion around retirement starts to make sense. Why people worry even when they're saving. Why pension figures feel both large and inadequate. Why retirement is talked about less confidently than it used to be. The idea hasn't disappeared, but the certainty has. And that quiet shift explains why so many people reach later life unsure whether they've done enough, even after decades of work. If you want more clear explanations of how money, business, and everyday systems actually work, subscribe.